morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. Jesse's getting my better side, and you're seeing again why I have a face for radio. The reason why is because it's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and in a bit I'll open up the phone lines, but first I have some questions for His Honor. But right now we welcome the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Carl, and good morning to our listeners.
Okay, well, last night we had some pomp and ceremony to welcome our new police chief. He had already been sworn in, but this was the formal one, and we had the police honor guard. A very nice ceremony.
Well, it was of colors. The honor guard is still a relatively new thing for the department, so it's neat to see them out in the community, and then at our own city council meeting, it's even more special. So it's obviously, as you said, to acknowledge and administer the oath of office for the new police chief that the Police and Fire Commission appointed effective the 5th of July. So just after the 4th of July holiday, he started with the city.
Okay, Chief Blevins, and hopefully sometime in the future we can get him on the show here.
That's my hope. He was meeting with representatives from the Sheriff's Department this morning. So I know he's been soaking up a lot. He's been sending me updates in terms of who he's meeting with, and I know he's pretty aggressive in establishing relationships very early on in his tenure with the city.
Well, let him know that he's welcome to stop by the station anytime. We'd love to sit down and talk with him and meet him. His opening statement to the council sounded very happy to be in the community, and you got a chance to meet his wife and the family. So
yes, met his wife last night. Been spending some time with him. I took him to lunch by the river. I think the first Thursday he was in town. It was a perfect day to take a walk down by the river and introduce him to some folks that might have been there. But yeah, it's been. I know he's got a lot of energy and he's a lot of enthusiasm. He comes from the Chicago area, in a suburb of Chicago, with some experience in previous work as a narcotics in the narcotics field. So obviously that's an area that has grown in need in this community as rural parts of the state have been affected by opiate and drug situations. So we're very excited to have his outside perspective, and I think the Police and Fire Commission did their due diligence and hours and days of screening, really, of all the candidates that came before them.
We had a very good field of candidates, and some folks are going, well, why couldn't they have picked a local person? I guess they have. Sometimes the reason why there's an independent police and fire commission is that they can look at this from different eyes, and sometimes it's good to have someone coming in, I guess, from outside. That's what I gathered from their deliberations or the reasons for their decision.
And I had a similar feeling when speaking to the president of the commission. I think it's no different than the school district just selecting an outside superintendent, Craig, who I had the pleasure of meeting with yesterday, or even the technical college. They selected a candidate from north central Wisconsin. So I think, to say local versus outside is not really a question. It's more or less the qualifications of the candidate, and as it should be, right? We want the most qualified person, and in some form, the commission felt that this candidate had higher credentials or better qualifications, and that's not to say that the others weren't qualified. They certainly were. When I saw the roster, it was like, this is exciting.
Well, that's actually that's a win-win-win.
Yeah.
You're going to have a good police chief regardless of what the decision. But Chief Blevins shows a history of proactive law enforcement taking steps to prevent problems from happening in the first place. So I'm looking forward to a chance to talk to him about his law enforcement philosophy. But that's what I got from his background.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay. Now, the other thing, it's not every day, and I'll show this to our TV viewing audience, that I get a press release, a news release, with both Senator Teston's letterhead and the letterhead of the city of Wisconsin Rapids, and that was the Senate budget plan incorporates investment in Alexander Field. And that was the big news that came out yesterday, $4 million, a joint news release, press release from you and Senator Teston. You talked a little bit about that your hopes now that we still don't have a budget,
right?
But how significant is that?
It's a step one of a three-step process, I would say. And that first, I will comment that it was the first of its kind in my time in 5.5 years, is issuing a joint release with our state senator. So I know Senator Teston has worked really hard, as is Representative Krug, on achieving this for our area. They're amongst peers from around the state who are all fighting for things for their area, and so this is substantial. I think will certainly make a major impact and achieve some of the really necessary improvements out at Alexander Field that will, I won't say modernize so much, but it'll make it more relevant and more accessible for users in our area. And thinking about Sand Valley's demand, but it's not just Sand Valley, right? It's also the next Sand Valley, whatever that might be, if not necessarily golf, but in some other form. Once you've got infrastructure and pavement built, there's a much more likelihood that somebody else is going to take advantage of it, because it's not an expense or a barrier to introduce it to the field as if it weren't there in the first place. So the $4 million really will achieve a couple of things. We hope that it'll extend our apron, and there have been a couple of days this summer already where we've had some peak times where we've had planes parked there that if we had another of a certain class of aircraft, we wouldn't be able to fit it onto the apron at the airport. So that was one major component, is the ramp space. It's the parking lot essentially for airplanes out in front of the terminal area.
Okay. Yes, one of the things that happens, a lot of these corporate jets that are coming here, these are business owners or business executives or folks with money. And if they like the area, they might see business opportunities maybe other people don't see. And all of a sudden they're coming and talking to you or to Lance Plimmel and saying, hey, we like this area. We'd like to do some business investment here.
Coincidentally, I had a voicemail from over the weekend that I returned, and it was a gentleman that was here visiting us, his daughter-in-law and his son. He was from Southern Ohio and, happened to never come through this area, now has a reason to come visit the area, and he had the similar concern. He's a business owner, and he wants to look at some other, the recreational and also the business park assets we've got, because he's looking at partnering with some folks to make another product, and he's got a buyer for his product that he needs to start getting production ramped up. So it was kind of an out of the blue call that you don't always get. Normally you're working with a site selector or somebody that's working on a company's behalf. But this was a very interesting, family in the area. They had moved to the area to take employment here in Wisconsin Rapids and happened to kind of fall in love. So I think that certainly is a dynamic that is, maybe it's rare, but it certainly is a possibility.
Okay. And we're going to, by the way, we'll have Senator Teston on the show on the first half of Friday's Morning Magazine. Also tomorrow, yes, I just double-checked my schedule. Tomorrow, during the Community Spotlight on the noon report, we're going to have the Fire Chief, Chief Kirkman, and Deputy Chief Young here, and we're going to be saluting them and putting the spotlight on the fire department on their reaccreditation and what it means for taxpayers and the people that they serve in this area. Your thoughts about that? Because that's quite an accomplishment. I think they were the second fire department in the whole state.
And for a while, we may have been the only, I believe, until some other folks got on board with the accreditation. And, for our residents, we invest a bit in keeping our professional staff trained, and that's our police and firemen as well as folks at City Hall, and to make sure that at a moment's notice they can respond most effectively. Obviously, in the case of protective services, safety is our primary concern, and making sure our crews are equipped with the most relevant skills. And that's the CAS reaccreditation really pushes the envelope. I mean, I've seen some of the real strict and stringent requirements that come before it, and I know it's not easy for us to get that reaccreditation. There was a situation where we were on the edge and we needed to address some things, more proactive things, but certainly that's why we go through the reaccreditation process. It's a look in the mirror. It helps us address our weaknesses if there are any, or give us a vote of confidence when we've got all the areas addressed. And I think really from a public safety perspective, I will put up our EMS against anybody and believe that we're going to come out on top because of the investment we make in our crews on a regular basis.
I'm a personal survivor from several years ago of a heart incident, and those boys, I quite honestly saved my life. So so I have a personal relation, or a personal feeling about our fire department and the EMS. But going back to the state budget, what problems does this ongoing dispute in Madison cause, besides having to wait to wonder about the money on the airport? What about your overall municipal budget?
Well, we typically forecast flat revenue payments from the state. And while that doesn't help us do more in the city necessarily to achieve more street maintenance or street reconstruction work or anything else, if it's our taxi service, which we receive a state and a federal payment for, unfortunately, it doesn't allow us to plan. And I think when we think about transportation in particular, it's aside from public safety, it's our next largest expenditure at the city. And this ongoing rift that the state assembly and the Senate and the governor have across the three branches of government is really frustrating as a taxpayer, right? Because I believe we should have the best, if not one of the best, transportation networks in the country. And why do we squabble, and why have we squabbled well over a year about ways to finance transportation? And so I think for me, it's a matter of doing more with less, and certainly DOT's gotten some directives by the governor to find ways to do projects less expensive.
Well, there was that audit that was highly critical of the DOT.
Right, and I think there's always ways to improve, and sometimes we should be building some of those regular audit pieces into our work. It's just a regular practice. It's a regular course of business in the private sector to make sure your cost containment is under control or in process. But I think as it relates to transportation financing, I disagree with the governor flat out in the sense that I think we need to raise revenues, and we need to raise revenues because the cost to construct just doesn't stay flat or decline. And at some point, you've got to add new revenue streams to the pot. Now, I hate the idea of tolling. I really despise that idea. Not that I travel to the southern part of the state, but whenever I go to Illinois, I hate paying tolls. It's so frustrating. The thing that bothers me the most probably is the cost to administer them. The private companies are typically hired to do that work, and the staff that are paid to collect the tolls. It's just, in my mind, it's a horribly inefficient way to collect a revenue payment.
And then your old professor, Ed Miller, was here Monday with Mr. Zerflu. And he pointed out this idea, well, we'll only toll at the border. Well, you can't do that. That's federal. That's unconstitutional under the U.S. Constitution. So you can't do that. And the infrastructure that you would have to build to do tolling in this state, I can't imagine how much money that would be, and that could be money that could be going into repairing roads.
Right. And none of us like construction delays, but one of the biggest delays when you cross the border is when they've modernized their tollway collection system, and it's horrible, right? It's just disgusting. But I think the gas tax in Wisconsin, we need to be automatic indexing the gas tax and bringing that back to raise. I mean, it's easy money, right? It's money that on an everyday basis makes sense. It's equitable. It crosses all users, whether they're truckers or everyday road drivers, Sunday drivers, whatever. We're collecting a very small amount of revenue from them, and I think it's a very proven method of collecting road payment.
Well, it was approved under Governor Thompson with the idea that it would be a sustainable fund for roads, but then some of it got diverted into other purposes. But we solved that problem with the constitutional amendment, which said you can't do that anymore in transportation funds. Transportation fees have to go to transportation highways. So since we solved the problem, I got people upset about indexing. Why not go back to indexing? It amounted to less than a half of a cent or something like that a year, and get that going again.
It's very minor in the grand scheme of things. But I do appreciate the governor's willingness to take a look at increased payments to municipalities for certain transportation aids. So I can't completely discredit the proposals that have been set forth, but at the same time, they're not enough. They're just a half-hearted approach to let's just give them something in terms of the municipalities that are maintaining the local roads and the some of the connecting highways through the cities. Like we've got a number of them in our city, and those things are aging. And we talk about 8th Street. Until they add more money to the pot, 8th Street's never going to get a reconstruction schedule to it, and it's really frustrating because while on one hand we don't want to throw any more good money after bad into that network, our residents are going to suffer because it's not going to be as nice to drive on over the course of the coming years.
And people end up paying more for repairs to their vehicles.
Right.
This is something Representative Krug and I have talked about, than you would have if you maintained the roads.
Yeah.
So you're saving here and spending a lot more here.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
And so as a driver, I'd much rather spend maybe a little bit more to maintain the road so I don't have to spend so much on vehicle repair.
Yeah, right. And the other big proposal that was included in the Senate proposal yesterday, as was in the governor's proposal, and that is a repeal of the personal property tax. And the city collects the personal property, administers that tax.
I was going to ask you about that.
As a business owner, I find it's horribly inefficient. It's often underreported. We've got assessors to check that kind of stuff.
It sounds like a stupid system to me.
It is a horrible system, and I wish the system could be modernized before we did away with the tax, just because I feel we're going to remove this business tax, right? And so somebody's going to pick up the tab for the tax break that's now given to businesses. And I think, there are businesses that have a pretty hefty personal property tax, and that's sort of the cost of doing business. Now, on the flip side of that is we can say to prospective businesses that are looking at Wisconsin, well, we don't have the personal property tax. And so there might be an incentive to certain businesses. And I know that's Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and some of the other groups really want to see that. And I'm skeptical that it's actually going to have that much of an impact on prospective businesses relocating to the state or businesses actually growing here, because in some form they're going to be paying. Someone's going to be paying for that tax break somewhere else, and they are in this budget. I think the number that I saw was $44 on an average homeowner that's going to be benefiting from the income tax reduction. Well, I don't care about the $44. I mean, keep the $44. Pave our roads, get a better transportation system. Let's make sure we've got the best state park system in the country. I mean, whatever the case might be, it's really, the budget proposals are not overly exciting. There are some things in there that I think are okay, but at the end of the day, as an everyday taxpayer, there's not much in it for me, so to speak, would be the same for most of the constituents in Wisconsin Rapids.
Let's talk about something closer to home. And there was a committee meeting prior to the council meeting, negotiations with Biron on the river trail and the update. And let's give us a little background on this. What's all involved with it?
Yeah.
And what's the city take on it and your take on it?
Sure. Well, a number of years ago, in the last, I would say 3, South Biron Drive was reconstructed by the Village of Biron. As users of that system, many of us, we can probably attest that it was, as is the city section, long overdue. So at that time, their engineers reached out to the city about a potential trail connection on the project. I know that their design was was highly debated up in the Village of Biron in terms of where the trail might go. The city opted to put the trail on the riverside. We believe that the recreational users would appreciate having the trail closest to the river as opposed to in the front yards of people's houses. And frankly, there's also the snow plowing effect then if you put a rec trail, who's going to maintain that? So we opted to put the trail on the riverside. We've done most of the project, or all the project has been done in the existing right-of-way. So we didn't have to purchase any real estate to narrow the road and shift the road toward the homes. Now, for some, it's a change because there was property there that was city right-of-way that was maintained by the property owner. So some might say, well, that was my front yard. But we believe that we've achieved a design that was a major compromise with the property owners. Narrowed the road, eliminated on-street parking. So the road width is a lot narrower than what would have been if there was, at least 8 feet wide on each side for parking, as well as the 8-foot recreational trail on the riverside. Well, dating back to last fall, there have been conversations with the Village of Biron because we share a corporate boundary there. And the road and the corporate line is kind of a strange, it's not a 90-degree curve across the street, it's kind of at a major diagonal. And so we, of course, the city wishes to have a connected trail system, one that connects, obviously is already connected to the south in with the Village of Port Edwards, but also to the east with Town of Grand Rapids there's a connection. But we also wanted that trail connection to the north, and I believe everybody always thought that would happen. Well, over the course of many months, our construction crews this spring mobilized to the project to get First Street North underway, but we didn't have an agreement on the connection. And it was a point of contention for all of us because we can't construct a trail connection, we can't do work in somebody else's jurisdiction without an agreement. And so over the course of the last couple of weeks, crews are getting through the project and reconstructing First Street north to Strawberry Lane in that area.
Right.
And residents have been very patient. We want to appreciate their appreciation for our work and getting that project done. But we still don't have an agreement. So last night, I would say at the 12th hour, Biron has sort of vacillated in their proposals. And I understand they've got a village board and they've got to get support amongst everybody, or at least a majority, to make something happen. Well, they've fallen short of the necessary votes to put forth a trail connection. So they felt that the city's design was not acceptable to them. It was too safe. There was improvements there that didn't need to be put there to keep vehicles on the road and pedestrians safe on the trail. And then ultimately there was the cost factor. And it's too expensive.
That's what's the real matter.
And ultimately there was the agreement on a number of areas, which, to me, if it's agreement without a willing to pay for it, you really don't have an agreement. It's maybe lip service, I guess. So, unfortunately, the proposal they submitted to us resulted in the city taxpayers picking up about $30,000 of the cost in the Village of Biron in order for us to build the trail that will ultimately connect the Village of Biron and the city of Wisconsin Rapids. And as a taxpayer, not as the city's elected representative, but as a taxpayer, that bothers me. We don't do work in other municipalities, nor do we give a $30,000 gift to somebody to get improvements done that are going to benefit everyone, right? So they agreed to pay, or at least have proposed that they'll agree to pay $10,000 toward the cost, and the city taxpayers will pick up the remaining. We have to do some work on the street, and then there's also the trail connection. It'll be a beautiful piece when it's done. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's going to connect the 2 miles the Biron has built that takes them to the village town hall, or the village hall, and then it'll obviously connect into our system, which will connect users down to Nakusa and beyond, or Grand Rapids for that matter. So, unfortunately, we've got a situation. City Council did take action. The consensus, I would say, at least amongst some members that spoke last night, was we've got to take a more holistic view to this. Do we want to support a community that supports recreational users, irregardless of maybe where they live and pay taxes? And that was sort of the attitude. If we want to support the downtown and get people downtown or get people on the riverfront, it's going to cost us some money, and it's going to cost us taxpayer money for somebody else's jurisdictional work. So that was the action that was taken last night. Now, the Village of Biron still has to act on their offer, and it sounds like they're going to call a special meeting by the end of this week. So if we have listeners in the Village of Biron, I strongly encourage you to call your representatives there and to build a connection. It would be laughable for generations to come to not have a connection at the line between the villages and the city.
Well, during the community meeting, Rick Bacoka from Reggie, he said, you guys agree on almost everything.
Yeah.
Except this one little aspect, and he said it would be sad. Mm-hmm. And I can just imagine in future years people going, what were they thinking?
Right.
If this isn't done right, it's going to be a historical embarrassment for both communities.
Right. The city's really our backs are up against the wall. If we want the trail connection, we have to pay for it, and it's unfortunate because typically in negotiations, each party pays half, whatever the equitable share is, and that's fair is fair. But we always know that fair is sometimes idealistic. It doesn't, not realistic at times.
Something to talk about with my friend John Evenson.
Yeah, sounds good. I think it's a healthy discussion. I felt like the dialogue was very civil, and I appreciate that. That was nice to have a debate that was civil, but I just ultimately we have differences, and here we are.
Okay. Well, we're going to take our first break, and then it's your turn. Now, the phone lines will be open at 715-424-2600. Your chance to talk to the mayor. We'll also be talking between phone calls about the splash pad, the aquatic park. I want to talk to you about all the purchasing of buildings and the like. I don't think some people, even in the real estate business, understand that these are properties that aren't paying taxes, right? And they're vacant. So we need some municipal real estate 101 too. But the phone lines will be open here on the Morning Magazine right after this break.
Good morning, and welcome back to The Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thanks again, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. Our monthly, and also Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. Jesse's here. And the reason why Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire hour, and the phone line's open right now, 715-424-2600. Those of you who want to buy and sell things on Over the Back Fence, please be patient and wait until 11:06. Let's talk about, well, first off, something Pam and I have been wondering. What's all the digging that's going on with water and lake crews and that we've been seeing, 2 Mile Avenue and everything else? What's going on?
Expressway and First Street North, or South, sorry. That was a number of just scheduled projects. The one across from the hospital on the Expressway was to terminate an old water main that was there, to abandon it. So it didn't have a connection anywhere, and they felt infrastructure-wise it was a project they wanted to have done. The 2 Mile project, I'm not familiar with what their work was out there. But a lot of, they've actually been doing a raw water line, and that might have been connected out in that vicinity. So that could have been the connection. The raw water line is essentially the water line that connects us to the pumps, or to the wells out in the town of Grand Rapids.
Okay. Now let's talk about, on these warm, muggy summer days, everyone's thinking about getting cool. Let's talk about the splash pad.
Yes.
What's the schedule there? We got an update just a couple of weeks ago from your office, and so what's the latest you can give us?
Well, the project is
and this is, for those of you, our listeners, it's at near Mead School.
Yeah, right beneath the West Side Water Tower. So that project near the old Mead Pool, former Mead Pool. The project is run and organized entirely by contractors, and so the city doesn't have any labor force itself working on the project. And unfortunately, the primary vendor, Vortex, who makes the splash and spray features, they had an early production delay on the anchors that are cast into the concrete to attach the fixtures or features above the surface to. So they had a delay in those, and those have to be there before they can pour the concrete. So that was a controlling item in terms of the schedule. We do have a contractual substantial completion date of the 17th of August. They've alerted us that it's going to be hard to meet that. And then we were also alerted that there's this water journey feature, which is a pretty cool feature for toddlers in particular, that there's also a delay in the production of that. So we're at the mercy of schedules and supplier schedules and contractor schedule to get it done, as well as Mother Nature at times. So we've been advised that they'll be close. There may be some aspects, if the water journey feature doesn't show, we're going to open the splash pad as soon as we humanly possible, as soon as it's possible. Do
we get a discount? Any discounts?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't remember the contract offhand if we had a performance measure in there. Some of our contracts now we're putting in performance measures of on time, especially on roads, because they can sit open or closed forever without any activities to the public, and that's not fun and friendly. So Splash Park, we hope, will open by Labor Day. That's my best hope at this point. Sometime in late August or Labor Day, we'll have it open.
Of course, it's all dependent on the weather, which has been wet this summer. Well, let's get you put on that headset, sir, and we have our first caller of the morning. And again, the phone lines are open at 715-424-2600. Your chance to visit with Mayor Vruwink. Good morning. You're on the Morning Magazine. Hello. Okay. Someone who wanted to be on Over the Back Fence, I'll bet. Okay. That leads into the aquatic park. Mm-hmm. How's the fundraising going for that? Because I guess the consultant said, listen, why don't you put off your groundbreaking till next year, because you have a better chance of getting people to bid on your project, because you're kind of late in the construction season.
Right. That's a fair and accurate depiction of that when we go to bid the project, we want to do it when many others are going to bid and not be one of the lone men and get a contractor that just happens to have a break in their schedule. But we did pause intentionally as well for fundraising. And so effectively the city has committed $5 million to the project. We believe that we should be able to raise the remaining $6.5 million to construct the entire entire proposed project, $6.5 million from pledges and donations. And folks can contribute to the project in many ways, like they would any other capital project. They can pledge over the course of a couple of years if they're giving a larger gift and want to spread it out over some time. They can also stop down and make a donation of any size at City Hall or contribute online. And so the plan is to continue to fundraise over the summer months here that remain, as well as the fall, and then issue construction documents when we've got a certain threshold met. The early threshold we've identified is about $4 million. That once we can achieve another $4 million in pledges and donations, we will then issue construction documents and feel comfortable moving forward. Otherwise, the city will be borrowing, obviously, for a remaining portion. And, not to say the city council would or wouldn't be interested in that. We believe it's a community project, and we want, as much as we want city taxpayers to support the project, we also feel that business and industry and philanthropic entities that are based here
well, it's going to be a regional facility.
That's right.
More than just other, local folks are going to be using that. Mm-hmm. So why not? Have you been getting responses from businesses yet? Or
we have, and we have not announced any of them because some of them are on budget cycles. I
was wondering about that because we're getting near the end of certain budget years.
Some start September 1, some start October 1, some are July 1. So we've missed a cycle for a couple of them as well. So it really depends on a whole confluence of factors.
Okay, we got a caller on the air, and you're on the Morning Magazine.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning, Mayor. One of the things is I highly agree with you on the personal property tax. I, at one time, was an assessor, and what's very unusual now is just ask your local assessor or any assessor what they think of the personal property tax. And I believe that they're the ones, along with the manufacturing and commerce, wants it eliminated. Mm-hmm. But what I heard when this was first proposed, being in Madison a few times for legislative issues, is that our clerks and treasurers were complaining because it was such a bother. Well, it means a lot of money to towns, villages, and cities. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't. I don't think they're going to find somebody else to pay for this.
Well, and I tend to
get
agree.
Money from some. Yeah.
Right. And I think they're going to try to backfill it, but unfortunately it removes a progressive tax source for us. That as communities grow, the tax collection raises. Now, in our community, it's been pretty flat, but it's about 6% of our city's overall revenue stream. 6% is no small number.
But, I will bet that no county, city, village, or town, has really sat down with their legislators and say, I think this is stupid that the money is going to come from someplace else. It's only because there's a lot of town officials and even aldermen and people like that and the village trustees that don't know of such a tax.
Right, because they haven't paid it. Right? If they haven't run a business.
Yeah, they haven't paid it.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you that it's a very cumbersome tax. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
But I do agree it takes time to figure out a good replacement, right? It takes time. I've been watching it in healthcare. It takes time to sort out a good compromise and replacement.
But I thought assessing in the 70s when I was where we had to go out and count cows and chickens and pigs and give a crop report of everybody, and that was eliminated with machinery and equipment. Then they eliminated that tax. Mm-hmm. But yes, I agree with you, and I have comments on the Biron thing, but I'm not going to say them on the air. But I'd like to talk to you personally about it.
I look forward to speaking with you.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
And that's the tough part with Wisconsin. We have a tremendous amount of diversity, and I wouldn't say we're more diverse than others necessarily because our property tax pays for a disproportionate amount of our services. But you start removing other diverse sources, you start balancing it more on the backs of these remaining sources. And I think sales tax is one that Wisconsin will be looking to raise as time goes on, and we'll see it for transportation. I think the municipalities and cities of which Wisconsin Rapids is a participant with the league and saying, well, give us a local option sales tax for transportation. If you're not going to fund the transportation system with a gas tax or registration fees or what have you, give us us a local option to add a small sales tax.
Representative Krug and I were talking about that, and there was an assembly bill or something.
There was, yeah.
And he's in favor of it, and
I think it makes sense. The locals know best. If they feel that they want to divert more dollars and collect more dollars. Now, for those that are in more tourist areas where they've got an influx of buyers, that's a great tax, right? Because you found a way to tax more people than just property owners for certain things. But that falls in the category of no new revenue, and a governor's pledged to not raise revenue. So it'll receive a line item.
I brought up the question with your old professor, Ed Miller, on Monday, and I said, I think this whole thing has been caused by the fact that Republicans, and especially the governor, have put themselves in an ideological box.
Right.
And no new taxes or no tax increases. And we always hear we got to run government like business. Well, I can't imagine a business person, and you were a business person, saying, well, I will never increase prices. Yeah,
unless you're the paper industry, right? Paper industry is selling at 1980s pricing, but look at where it's gotten them, right?
Yeah.
Out of a lot of reasons.
I mean, I just don't see, so I just think when you do make those kind of pie-in-the-sky promises, you put your own self in a bad place, and now they're trying to work their way out of it, and that's why they're in conflict.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about transportation is it crosses all political ideological spectrums. Well, it really is just a necessary
basically, this transportation debate is places like Wisconsin Rapids against Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, your urban rural again.
Yeah, who's going to get the larger share of the pot? And typically it's those that have a voice or a lobbyist sometimes, and not any ill respect to our folks in Milwaukee, Madison. They're the ones that are driving the income tax collections and affording us the ability to receive state aid payments. But at the same time, our communities can't grow if our transportation networks can't improve. And it's as simple as that.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I want to talk recycling with you. You're listening to the Morning Magazine. Welcome back to the final portion of our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media are here, and you can view a recording of this on your favorite cable channel, or also on their website, and you can do that in high definition 24/7. Someone brought this up, and I thought I'd bring it up. They haven't called, but I'm going to bring it up. There's a controversy over recycling bins in mobile home parks. And this person was the limitations that are happening at their park, and a number of these are senior parks. A popular trend is for seniors to have their summer place in a manufactured park here, and then maybe another winter home in a manufactured park in Texas or Florida or Arizona. Okay, but so the question is, with the limitations of these recycling bins and how the distribution was handled, could be a hardship for some seniors. And so why don't you explain what the city approved, and is this something that needs to be readdressed? Hindsight being 2020, okay, we got a problem here, let's fix it.
Well, one of the early problems or mistakes that we had done or had committed was when we distributed the carts. We partnered with a vendor to distribute the carts for us. Actually, the vendor that produced the carts had a service that they provided where they'll deliver the carts to residential parcels in the city. Well, they over-delivered in certain parts of town, and one of the parts was mobile home parks, where carts were delivered in places where previously the service had not been performed. So we immediately created this expectation that if we put a recycle bin there, we're going to collect your recyclables, when there may have been a contract provider like a Veal or an Advanced Disposal or a Waste Management or somebody else, Express Recycling, that had previously done that service on a contract basis, not provided by the city. And so the city council had to reconcile the situation. Did we go collect the bins now and say, well, no, we made a mistake, or might we want to consider? Now, I would agree with the city council decision in that we have the capacity now, by going automated, to perform more service. And so ultimately the decision was made. The carts are not cheap. They're about $50 to deliver. And we've got 8,000 residential parcels, plus those that are mobile homes and things like that. Ultimately the decision was made that townhouses and condos over 5 units in a concentrated spot would have to contract for the service. So they're able to bring in a 5-yard dumpster or something and collect recyclables that way. But then mobile home parks, it was decided that we would put one bin per 5 units or mobile homes. And then if they want their own bin, they could pay for it. But 1 to 5 was the ratio that was determined to be the easiest. And based on space and storage, I'm not sure if everyone had the space to store their cart. I know some folks have struggled to accommodate their bin somewhere in their property. So ultimately, the option exists for folks to have their own cart if they live in a mobile home or manufactured park, but they would need to pay for the bin, not pay for collection costs. The city will assume the collection costs of that service.
Okay. I guess how is it handled in other communities? I know when we were doing the recycling study, we looked at nearby. We were one of the last communities to have these bins. How is it handled in other communities?
Similarly, I think there's some disparity though in how what decision was made. I think some municipalities have said anything beyond a single-family residence or even a duplex must contract privately.
Okay.
But I tend to believe a bit more liberally that if we provide the service, people are hopefully going to recycle. It's free to them. They don't have to charge for it, especially because we've got the capacity. And in some form, the businesses and residents are all paying for the service in some form. And further, we're also, the decision was made that we will start providing small businesses the ability to have their city collect their recyclables. Presently, we don't, or we hadn't, right? And so they had to contract by ordinance with a private service. Now, I would admit not all of them did. They maybe take their recyclables home and whatever, but now all they have to do is buy the cart and then pay for the service. But it's a great inexpensive service in comparison to what some of the private contractors charge for the recycling service. And ultimately, when the market comes back for recyclables, the city will receive a revenue payment for the collection it performs.
Let's talk about the property acquisitions. Two-part question. I'd like an update. But there is this debate by some that says, well, why is the city borrowing money, or why is the council approving the acquisition of properties off the tax rolls? Mm-hmm. First off, correct me if I'm wrong, the properties that have been acquired and demolished and the like the Labor Temple and some others, there was no tax income coming in, was there?
They were on the tax rolls, so there would have been some taxable use there.
But who pays the tax?
Well, it would have been paid by the property owner at the time. So yes, there was some properties were on the tax rolls. Now there are certain properties in the downtown that some folks have approached the city about the city acquiring them. Now, the city has a very clear strategy when it comes to property acquisition. Will the real estate that the property sits on be useful in future developments? And secondly, will it generate higher property tax if the city were to step in and provide a gap benefit? It's just like a small business loan or a low interest loan. That's meant to serve a gap. And if the gap is the building's too expensive to tear down in order to achieve a greater development, that's the role the city has played, and that's commonly played by municipalities, especially when we think about partnerships with the state. Property acquisition is a qualifying expense that the state is willing to reimburse for. So as we've sought other sources externally for our work, Labor Temple, namely, the state granted the city a $150,000 grant. The demolition cost about $60,000. That offset our local match for this grant. And so ultimately, it's all about generating new tax base. Our downtown TIF is flat. It has been flat. We haven't had any new development. And part of the barriers to achieving new development on a large scale is property acquisition and demolition of the existing properties. Now, of course, there has to be some, I think, a historical question of, does that building have historical significance, and should it be reinvested in because there are resources and incentives to do that? Or is there an opportunity to create a dense development? And ultimately, the city's strategy is to create housing units in the downtown area, because when housing units exist and rooftops exist, new business starts happen. It's just a simple equation. And they may not be manufacturing but commercial services sometimes, dental clinics, convenience store, those types of things are that co-locate restaurants. They co-locate when you've got dense amount of housing units. So the city hasn't acquired any property recently. I think our last acquisition would have been the Labor Temple, and that would have been the last demolition we've done. But we do plan to acquire more properties, and we will. It's the normal course of business. I think about when the city acquired all the property for the mall in the 70s. For 30, 40 years, we enjoyed the benefits of that property and the redevelopment that the city took on, the redevelopment authority at the time, to make that happen. And, the city acquired the former Walmart property, right, and turned that into an adaptive reuse project, which is now the Centralia Center. So it's not uncommon for municipalities to buy property. Now, some might say, well, leave it up to the private developers. We have enough properties in this community, and the economics are not the same than when they were constructed. So at some point, somebody else has to step in. And we firmly believe that in a very strategic manner, it's an appropriate role for the city to play, and the city council has generally agreed.
Okay. What about the latest on the Triangle project?
So in August, we plan to put forth a recommendation to the council to begin negotiating and working on a concept with a developer. And until that time happens, I can't really share any more other than it's consistent with what we've been saying before, and that's housing units, some retail commercial space on the main floor, multi-story, so 3 to 4 stories, and some form of underground parking on site. So we're eliminating the surface lots that are kind of sprawling that are also prohibiting future infill development. So that's the concept. That'll happen in August. And speaking with the developer, there's a high degree of confidence that we can find a development, an anchor tenant, and ultimately fill the residential units in some form as apartments or condos.
The problem with the Mead-Witter building and those tenants and the county parking, and to me, it's just going back to what was the situation when the river block was Consolidated Papers.
I would agree.
You had the same, I remember that whole back side was Consolidated Parking.
Yeah.
So, but now there seems to be this, oh my God, it's causing all these problems. What can we do?
Well, I firmly believe there is a solution, and it's not too far ahead, and that's business owners and employees of those businesses and tenants should not be utilizing street parking for their primary parking source. It's 2-hour parking. It's meant to be transactional parking for an in and out type of experience. And some people, it's legitimate. They're in and out of a building or a business multiple times a day. But ultimately, those that are there for an 8-hour day generally should be parking in a parking lot that may be provided by the city, may be available from another business that has some surplus space. Now, specific to the Mead-Witter building, there was this question, and as a former business owner, I sold my company in May, but as a previous owner of that business, we enjoyed the benefits of a row of parking in that parking lot, about 20 spaces, I recall, for a lot of years, right? And it was when the river block had far less occupancy. Stora Enso and Consolidated afforded that to its tenants in the Mead-Witter building because the company owned that building, right? That was ultimately sold in 2003 or so, as I understand. But ultimately, I don't think there's a parking problem downtown. I do think the appropriate use of parking is in question, and that's where people should be parking based on their use. And I think, the river block being occupied is a huge demand driver for businesses. You ask, Bob at the coffee shop, for example, or maybe even Shaw Lee. These folks are experiencing increased traffic and more demand for their goods and services, which is exciting, and that's how it should be. But in terms of parking, I do think, if somebody needs customer parking or drop-off or make special accommodations, if you've got a quick transient, there's ways to accommodate that. Make a call when you're downtown, and we'll be there or something.
Are you going to be talking with these business owners as a county? Okay, and it seems like we just got to look back at our history because this isn't new.
No, right. And some of the tenants were not there when.
Oh yeah, I know.
And that's the challenge. But no, the county's just talked with them. Adam in our community development office and we've all talked with many of the tenants. It's about education, though. The city has parking permit spaces available, which will be their own space with their name on it every day during business hours, and so that's an option for $13 a month. people can purchase a parking pass from the city and park in a lot that has their name on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of ground this morning, and I appreciate your time, and we'll do it again next month.
Carl, thank you.
Okay.
To our listeners.
And we want to thank, again, our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, Jesse, who's been here taping in high definition our conversation. And that's going to do it for the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com.